The extraordinary childhood genius of Blaise Pascal is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of human intellect, because it directly challenged the deeply rooted belief of his era that true knowledge could only be achieved through long, formal study under established masters. In the 17th century, mathematics was considered an elite discipline, guarded by scholars who spent decades mastering ancient texts and complex methods. Into this rigid intellectual world stepped a child who had no formal mathematical education, yet possessed a mind powerful enough to rediscover the foundations of geometry on his own. Blaise Pascal was born in 1623 in Clermont, Fer, and France, into a household that valued learning and discipline. His father, Etienne Pascal, was himself a trained mathematician and civil servant, deeply aware of how demanding the subject could be. Out of concern that early exposure to mathematics might distract his son from classical education, Etienne made a strict decision. Blaise was forbidden from studying mathematics until he was older. This decision, though well-intentioned, unintentionally set the stage for one of the most astonishing demonstrations of natural genius the world has ever seen. Instead of suppressing Blaise's curiosity, the ban intensified it. The young Pascal was fascinated by patterns, shapes, and logical relationships. With no access to books or formal instruction, he began asking simple but profound questions. What is a line? What is a circle? Why do shapes behave the way they do? Using everyday objects, drawings on the floor, and his own imagination, he began exploring these ideas intuitively. Step by step, guided only by reasoning, he reconstructed basic geometric principles that had taken ancient Greek mathematicians centuries to formalize. By the age of 12, Blaise Pascal had independently rediscovered many of the fundamental propositions of Euclidean geometry. This achievement alone would have been extraordinary for an adult scholar, but for a child it was almost unimaginable. When his father finally discovered what Blaise had been doing in secret, he was reportedly stunned. The realization that his son had reached conclusions similar to those of Euclid without ever seeing a mathematical text forced Etienne to abandon his earlier fears. At that moment, it became clear that Blaise's mind operated at a level far beyond normal childhood intelligence. Once formally introduced to mathematics, Pascal's progress was explosive. Concepts that took others years to grasp seemed almost obvious to him. He did not merely memorize rules, he understood the logic behind them with deep clarity. This ability allowed him to question assumptions that older mathematicians accepted without hesitation. While many scholars relied heavily on tradition and authority, Pascal relied on pure reasoning. This difference in approach gave him an intellectual freedom that even experienced mathematicians often lacked. As a teenager, Pascal began participating indirectly in mathematical discussions among leading French scholars through his father. These were men who had dedicated their lives to mathematics, yet they found themselves confronted with ideas produced by a boy barely old enough to be considered a student. At 16, Pascal wrote a treatise on conic sections that demonstrated not only technical mastery, but extraordinary originality. The ideas presented were so advanced that some senior mathematicians initially struggled to believe they had been written by someone so young. This moment marked the point at which Pascal's childhood genius became a public challenge to the mathematical establishment. His work did not merely add to existing knowledge, it reshaped it. Experienced mathematicians were forced to reconsider their own understanding, and in some cases, to admit that a teenager had seen further than they had after decades of study. This is why Pascal's story is often described as humiliating to the mathematicians of his time, not because he sought to embarrass them, but because his natural brilliance exposed the limitations of traditional learning methods. What makes Pascal's childhood genius even more striking is his emotional maturity and intellectual discipline. Many prodigies show flashes of talent, but lack focus or depth. Pascal, however, combined raw intelligence with intense concentration and seriousness of purpose. He approached problems with patience and rigor, traits usually developed only after years of scholarly training. This combination allowed him to produce work of lasting value rather than fleeting cleverness. Pascal's early achievements also challenged broader assumptions about human potential. His life suggested that the capacity for deep reasoning is not solely a product of age or education, but something that can emerge naturally when curiosity meets logical thinking. In this sense, Pascal's childhood genius was not just a personal triumph. It was a philosophical challenge to society's understanding of learning and intelligence. In reflecting on Blaise Pascal's early life, we see more than the story of a gifted child. We see the power of an independent mind, capable of standing against authority and tradition through reason alone. His childhood genius serves as a reminder that innovation often comes from those willing to ask fundamental questions, even when they are told they are not ready. Pascal proved, before he reached adulthood, that true intellect does not wait for permission. It reveals itself through insight, courage, and an unrelenting desire to understand the world. The revolutionary contributions of Blaise Pascal to mathematics, science, and logic at a very young age represent one of the most astonishing intellectual achievements in human history. What makes this keynote especially powerful is not just the brilliance of his ideas, but the age at which they appeared. In a time when scholarly authority was closely tied to seniority and tradition, Pascal produced work as a teenager that permanently altered the direction of multiple fields. His achievements forced the intellectual world to confront a difficult truth: genius does not wait for age or permission. By his mid-teens, Pascal had already moved beyond rediscovering known ideas and entered the realm of true innovation. At the age of 16, he authored a treatise on conic sections, a complex area of geometry dealing with curves such as circles, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas. These curves were not just abstract shapes. They were central to understanding optics, astronomy, and mechanics. Pascal's work introduced what is now known as Pascal's theorem, a result so elegant and general that it remains a foundational concept in projective geometry today. For seasoned mathematicians, the depth of insight required to produce such a theorem was remarkable. For a 16-year-old, it was almost beyond belief. The reaction of the mathematical community was a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Some scholars initially suspected that Pascal's father must have played a major role in the work. Yet, as discussions continued, it became clear that the ideas bore the unmistakable mark of original thought. Pascal demonstrated a rare ability to see deep structural relationships where others saw only technical details. His reasoning was direct, economical, and powerful, stripping complex problems down to their essential logic. This style of thinking allowed him to leap ahead of established mathematicians who were often bound by traditional methods. Pascal's revolutionary spirit did not stop with geometry. In his late teens and early 20s, he turned his attention to practical problems, driven by a belief that intellectual knowledge should be useful. This belief led him to invent the Pascaline, one of the world's first mechanical calculating machines. Designed to assist his father in managing tax calculations, The device could perform addition and subtraction automatically through a system of gears and wheels. While crude by modern standards, the Pascaline was a bold leap toward automation. It demonstrated that abstract mathematical principles could be embedded into machines, a concept that would eventually lead to modern computers. The significance of this invention goes far beyond its immediate function. Pascal was not merely building a tool, he was redefining the relationship between humans and machines. At a time when calculations were slow, error-prone, and entirely manual, Pascal envisioned a future in which machines could extend human cognitive power. This idea placed him centuries ahead of his time and firmly established him as a pioneer of computational thinking. Another revolutionary area of Pascal's early work was probability theory. Through correspondence with other thinkers, particularly Pierre de Fermat, Pascal helped lay the foundations of a mathematical framework for understanding chance and uncertainty. Prior to this, probability was largely a matter of intuition and gambling practice. Pascal transformed it into a systematic discipline governed by clear principles and logical reasoning. This work would later influence economics, statistics, insurance, and decision theory, shaping how societies manage risk and make rational choices. What makes Pascal's contribution to probability especially remarkable is the intellectual leap it required. He was not simply solving isolated problems. He was creating a new way of thinking about uncertainty. This shift had profound philosophical implications. By showing that chance could be analyzed mathematically, Pascal challenged the belief that randomness was beyond human understanding. He demonstrated that even uncertainty could be approached with reason and structure. Pascal also made important contributions to physics at a young age, particularly in the study of fluids and atmospheric pressure. Building on earlier experiments, he investigated the nature of vacuums and demonstrated that air has weight and exerts pressure. His experiments helped overturn long-held Aristotelian beliefs that nature abhorred a vacuum. By showing that empty space could exist and be studied scientifically, Pascal contributed to a broader shift toward experimental science based on observation and measurement rather than philosophical speculation. What ties all of Pascal's revolutionary contributions together is his method of thinking. He approached problems with a rare combination of creativity and rigor. He was willing to question accepted authorities, but he did so with precise arguments and careful reasoning. This approach allowed him to move beyond incremental improvement and achieve genuine breakthroughs. His youth may even have been an advantage, freeing him from the intellectual habits and assumptions that constrained older scholars. Pascal's early achievements forced the intellectual community to confront uncomfortable questions about expertise and authority. If a young man could revolutionize mathematics, physics, and logic before reaching full adulthood, what did that say about the limits of traditional education? Pascal's life suggested that while education is important, true innovation often arises from independent thought and intellectual courage. In reflecting on Blaise Pascal's revolutionary contributions at such a young age, we see more than a list of achievements. We see a transformation in how knowledge itself was created. Pascal helped move Europe toward a modern scientific mindset, one that valued clarity, experimentation, and logical structure. His work reminds us that age does not define impact. With curiosity, discipline, and fearless reasoning, a young mind can reshape the foundations of human understanding and leave a legacy that endures for centuries. The mind of Blaise Pascal was not only sharp in calculation and bold in innovation, but also deeply reflective, capable of turning inward to question the meaning, limits, and purpose of human knowledge itself. This unique combination of intellectual brilliance and philosophical depth forms the third keynote of his life, a mind that united logic with humility, reason with reflection. While many geniuses are remembered solely for their technical achievements, Pascal stands apart because he recognized that intelligence alone could not answer the most profound questions of existence. From an early age, Pascal's extraordinary intellect exposed him to the power of reason. He saw how logical thinking could dismantle long-held assumptions and reveal hidden truths. Yet this very power led him to confront its limitations. Unlike many scholars who believed that reason could ultimately explain everything, Pascal became increasingly aware that certain aspects of human experience, such as faith, suffering, love, and meaning, resisted purely logical explanation. This realization did not weaken his intellect. Instead, it refined it, giving his thought a depth that extended beyond mathematics and science. Pascal's personal life played a crucial role in shaping this reflective dimension of his mind. He suffered from chronic illness throughout much of his life, enduring intense physical pain that often confined him to bed. Rather than turning him bitter or detached, this suffering forced Pascal to confront human fragility. He experienced first, and how limited the human body is, no matter how powerful the mind may be. These experiences pushed him to think deeply about mortality, vulnerability, and the human condition. As Pascal matured, he began to explore philosophical and theological questions with the same rigor he had once applied to geometry. He did not abandon reason. Instead, he placed it within a broader framework. He argued that while reason is an extraordinary tool, it is not sufficient on its own. There are truths, he believed, that the heart understands in ways the intellect cannot fully articulate. This famous idea, that the heart has reasons which reason does not know, captures the essence of Pascal's mature thinking. What makes this perspective remarkable is that it came from one of the greatest logical minds in history. Pascal was not rejecting reason out of ignorance or frustration. He understood its strengths better than most. His acknowledgement of its limits was therefore not a retreat from intelligence, but an act of intellectual honesty. He recognized that human beings are suspended between greatness and weakness, capable of astonishing insight, yet bound by uncertainty and doubt. Pascal's reflections on human nature revealed a deep psychological insight that was far ahead of his time. He observed that people often distract themselves with entertainment, ambition, and social status to avoid confronting deeper existential questions. According to Pascal, this constant search for diversion was a way of escaping the uncomfortable truth of human mortality and insignificance in the vast universe. These observations remain strikingly relevant in the modern world, where distraction is more abundant than ever. Despite his emphasis on humility, Pascal never dismissed the value of knowledge or scientific inquiry. On the contrary, he believed that understanding the universe could inspire awe and reverence. His famous reflection on humanity as a thinking reed, a physically weak yet intellectually capable, captures this balance perfectly. Humans, he argued, are insignificant in size compared to the cosmos, yet their ability to think gives them dignity. This idea bridges science and philosophy, showing how empirical knowledge and existential reflection can coexist. Pascal's approach to faith further illustrates this union of logic and humility. Rather than relying on blind belief, he engaged with faith using reasoned arguments, the most famous of which is now known as Pascal's wager. This argument does not attempt to prove the existence of God through logic alone. Instead, it frames belief as a rational choice under uncertainty, acknowledging both the power and the limits of human reasoning. Whether one agrees with the argument or not, it demonstrates Pascal's unique ability to apply logical thinking to deeply personal and philosophical questions. In his later years, Pascal increasingly turned away from public scientific debates, not because he had lost his intellectual power, but because his priorities had shifted. He became more focused on moral and spiritual reflection, seeking a life aligned with humility and compassion. Yet even in this phase, his writing retained the clarity, precision, and intensity that defined his earlier work. His thoughts were later collected in writings that continue to influence philosophy, theology, and literature. The enduring legacy of Blaise Pascal lies not only in his theorems or inventions, but in this rare harmony between intellect and introspection. He showed that the greatest minds are not those that claim absolute certainty, but those that recognize complexity and mystery. Pascal's life reminds us that true wisdom emerges when knowledge is tempered by humility and when reason is guided by reflection. In the end, Blaise Pascal stands as a symbol of intellectual completeness. He mastered logic without becoming arrogant, embraced faith without abandoning reason, and explored the universe without forgetting the human soul. His mind, balanced between sharp analysis and deep reflection, continues to speak to humanity across centuries, reminding us that the pursuit of truth is not only a matter of intelligence, but also of understanding what it means to be human.